In this session, Dynamic Plan Design, Give Employers What They Want, we will be exploring the current renewal process that the industry gives employers and the disconnect between that and what they've told us they wanted in their decision-making process. We will then compare that to the new dynamic model introduced by Dynamis. So understanding the employer experience, we really need to take a look at the current process. And if we look at the market and we look at agencies across the country, they've all been using the same approach where they're using static paper models to drive that communication. And by using that static paper process, primarily driven by Excel spreadsheets, we forced employers into a decision-making process that's uncomfortable for them and have really created a disconnect between what we're giving them and what they want. We're going to look at the advantage of moving into a dynamic real-time plan design model based on what employers told us they wanted in that decision-making process. And that really is what dynamic plan design is all about. It's reinventing that plan design decision-making process on a state-of-the-art technology platform based on how employers told us they want to make those decisions. If we take a closer look at the current renewal process and dive in, it really starts across the industry the same way. We basically go in with our spreadsheets and show current, renewal, and a bunch of proposed options. But it's a very segmented process that requires multiple meetings. A normal flow of this process might be we go in and show different benefits of different plans, all compared at total cost. We force employers to make decisions off of that total cost approach. Then we have to circle back and look at if there's any additional funding. Any health reimbursement arrangements or seeding of HSA accounts require additional paper models and spreadsheets and additional meetings. And if we are fortunate enough to be able to have the technology to help the employers with their contribution strategies, usually that requires additional meetings while we put together more Excel spreadsheets filled with formulas to try and model out contribution strategies. The reality of it is we are using as an industry technology that really came to be in the 90s. Excel spreadsheets really became used widely back in the 90s with version 2.0, where we actually started to be able to use spreadsheets with a mouse. That's how far back the technology goes that we use to communicate plan designs and showcase our recommendations every day. Then we look at the complexity of plan designs where we bring in age-rated. That usually requires another complex series of spreadsheets, in some cases using one set of templates for age rating against an additional set of templates for composite rating. Then bring in self-funding and even more templates. Now we have more spreadsheets for stop loss and administration, and it's no wonder that employers get frustrated from reviewing all of these Excel exhibits in an attempt to make good plan design decisions for their companies and employees. The reality of it is that your job now requires Excel expertise. And really what we're doing is having you forced into the position of having to be a software engineer, and you're writing code through your Excel program. And the reality of this is that across the country, large agency, small agency, there really is no differentiation in the process. That whole idea of that static paper spreadsheet approach to communicating plan design information is the same from coast to coast, from large agency to small agencies. We've talked about the disadvantage of working with this static paper model, but we want to talk a little bit more specifically of the pitfalls of the chosen technology of our industry to interact with employers, and that is spreadsheets. So an agency that analyzed the use of spreadsheets in government put together a list of pitfalls associated with using spreadsheets. First is security. When we use spreadsheets with our clients, a lot of times we're emailing them the results, and we're now using email, which has its own security hazards, and we're trying to use these spreadsheets, which are unsecure. I've seen the password protected spreadsheets, but that's a failed attempt at security. Go ahead and Google how to hack an Excel password, and you don't have to get past the first page in order to get into that sheet. On top of that, people can make changes and send it back, and we really have no record of it. susceptible to trivial human errors. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the bottom line is the use of these templates that we keep reusing over and over for employers are just susceptible to trivial human errors, and they can have huge impact in how we're approaching this with employers. Difficult to troubleshoot or test. In the software world, any changes go through an extensive testing process to make sure that the integrity of the code remain, and goes through a series of automated processes to make sure that the results still work. We're not able to do that in Excel. Do you really go and check the math on all of your spreadsheets, even though you're manually putting in new data over and over again in the same template? Unfit for Agile practices really talks about that static nature, and that it's hard to make adjustments on the fly that are outside the realm of our spreadsheet templates. Not designed for collaboration. There's no way to track changes and who's entering different information. They're hard to consolidate. Too often we're actually presenting in our exhibits. We're not even pulling information from that into a report that we can use, especially when we're dealing with a business owner executive that only needs summaries of the information, not the full detail of every exhibit. Unsuited for business continuity really speaks to the personal nature of spreadsheets, and the idea that one person designs these templates based on how they think the information should be presented, and it becomes very personal. And when we have a new person come on board, it may feel uncomfortable for them, and a lot of times they have to start over and redo that spreadsheet so it makes sense to them. The other thing it speaks to is the idea that all of those spreadsheets are usually contained in a lot of different areas. The data is not contained in a central environment. So the fact is, if we lose all our spreadsheets somehow, it's going to be very difficult to get them back, since that data is not stored in a central spot. It's stored in the specific spreadsheets. And ultimately, what they said was that Excel spreadsheets were incapable of supporting quick decision making. There's really some irony in that the chosen tool that we use as an industry to help employers through these complex decisions has been described as incapable of supporting quick decision making. Let's take a little closer look at the impact of errors. Anybody who's been working in spreadsheets long enough probably has their own horror stories about errors that occurred within their spreadsheets. And in fact, current estimates based on a recent study indicate that about 88% of all spreadsheets contain at least one major error. 2000 study states that 1 in 5 large businesses suffer financial losses due to simple spreadsheet errors. Those errors are really impacting the finances of companies. And again, this is the chosen technology that we're using to present complex, high-dollar items when we get into health insurance. The problem is that those errors are usually only discovered after the damage has been done. It's like the worst case scenario to have your client actually find the error in your spreadsheets. And if you go out and Google spreadsheet disasters, the one that comes back most often is going to be JP Morgan's 2012 London Whale, where a simple spreadsheet error in one cell that added them rather than averaging them actually impacted that company and lost them $3.1 billion. That's right, a $3.1 billion loss because one spreadsheet cell was adding rather than averaging. So the impact of those errors obviously have huge financial impact. Yet again, that's the technology that our industry has chosen to work with employers in selecting their plan designs. Now let's take a look at the employer view of the process. So we really had an opportunity to do employer research before we went to market. We had a chance to interview dozens of employers from all over the country, Fortune 500 companies, small companies, and really be able to talk to them about that renewal process with their current broker. And what we found right away was that there is a huge disconnect between what we give employers in terms of that process and what they told us they want. right? No one in our research stood up and said, I love our Excel spreadsheets. I love the renewal time, all the meetings, all the review of those exhibits. Quite the contrary. We actually had a lot of employers that said things like, I love my broker, but I hate this process. Some of them actually said that this was the worst part of their job. Many of them described the whole process as uncomfortable. Even after decisions have been made, they felt uncomfortable that they made the right decisions. Many said that this is the only major expense in our company that we operate without a budget because, again, our industry have forced employers into this process that does not fit with how they like to make decisions. And that ultimately is where the differentiation is going to come to when we're able to separate ourselves from our competitors by giving employers relief from a process that they've unanimously declared as frustrating. So what do employers want? Well, here's what they told us. The process needs to be simplified. The days of going through with 3-ring binders and folders filled with spreadsheet after spreadsheet has become too burdensome for them. It needs to be simplified. They also talked of speed, and the reality of it is we're in a Google age where there's an expectation that we should be able to get answers to questions in seconds. And when we're dealing with health insurance and static spreadsheet models, questions like, what is that change in contribution strategy? How does that impact our families? What if we want to restructure our health reimbursement arrangement? What is the impact to the company? Normally that halts what we call that decision-making momentum, forces us to go back, re-update, remodel our paper static exhibits, and then have to come back for another meeting next week and hope that we can get to that same point we were when we left off. So employers talked about the speed, that real-time nature of being able to have access to information, of really being able to help them make better decisions. And ultimately what they said was we weren't looking for someone to come in and tell us, here's the plan you should have. They really said they were looking for someone to help them and guide them in this complex post-ACA world and really help guide them to decisions that make sense for their company and their employees. So from a practical aspect, what we're talking about is moving away from the old way. Excel was never meant to be a presentation tool, and we've talked about all the inherent pitfalls of using spreadsheets as this presentation and communication for plan design information. Spreadsheets might be fine if we're setting up a budget to save for a vacation, but for the complex financial analysis that's required in helping employers make plan design decisions, Excel spreadsheets are a thing of the past. What we're talking about in dynamic plan design is the idea of being able to rebuild the entire decision-making process that employers go through with their brokers when choosing plan designs for their company and employees and build it in the state-of-the-art technology platform that allows access to all of the information they need to answer their questions in real time, to maintain that decision momentum and get to those decisions quicker and to make sure that they're comfortable that they have all the information they need to make those decisions. So what does it all mean, this transition from that old static paper approach to a dynamic, real-time collaborative environment? Well, first of all, it means efficiencies. And we can look at efficiencies in a couple of ways. First of all, the time to prepare. Once we've gone through the learning curve of learning a new tool and learning a new software application, we find that our clients are shaving hours off the time to prepare. One of the underlooked efficiencies also comes into play when we look at the number of meetings that it takes to get an employer through that decision-making process. And when we started evaluating and talking to employers and agencies about how many meetings that took, we found that we're able to help take the number of meetings down that it needs, and in a lot of times be able to do it in one meeting. Think about how much additional time we free up if we could take just one meeting off of every renewal within the agency. Now, even more important than efficiencies, it really comes back to that improved client experience. about really giving our employers what they want in that day-to-day interaction we have with employers on renewals. And with that improved client experience comes retention. You're not going to lose a piece of business when you take someone from a dynamic collaborative model that's built on what they said they were looking for. You're not going to lose a piece of business to somebody coming back in with their 3-ring binders full of spreadsheets again. So it definitely has an impact on our retention. It also has a huge impact on sales, as we've seen more and more Dynamis agencies start to understand that that whole frustration with the current process is really a big enough pain point where being able to move in an environment built and suited around what they're looking for is playing into their decisions on what brokers they're working with. So differentiating ourselves from our competitors by being able to give employers what they want is ultimately having large impact on sales for our Dynamis agencies. And even if we're not involved in the sales end of it, the reality of it is sales is what keeps everybody's job afloat. And we all know that new sales is really the lifeblood of any agency. And by being able to have real differentiation from our competitors in a specific area that employers told us is frustrating is really having an impact in sales. And that's what our Dynamis agencies are reinforcing for us.